Hey everyone, it's Dr. Thorpe Mize. Welcome back. We have our Q&A today regarding food poisoning and traveler's diarrhea. I'm so happy to have you guys join me. Uh, this week, or this month, we've been talking about food poisoning, what it is, how you get it, and we've also been talking about traveler's diarrhea. So I wanted to see what questions do you guys have about all these things that I've been talking about. So I'm going to get right into it and just review the things that I mentioned before, which is the CDC recommendations for the 4 simple steps for how to lower your chances of getting food poisoning, which basically includes cleaning your food, separating your food, making sure part of cleaning is making sure you're washing your hands properly when you're handling food, before touching food items, and after. Especially if you're handling things like meat, you want to make sure you're washing your hands directly after before touching something else. Make sure you're cooking your food. You don't want to eat undercooked food, or as we call it, street food, because sometimes the food that's prepared on the street is not thoroughly cooked, and that's the reason for it. The next thing is you want to chill your food. Avoid eating perishable foods 1 to 2 hours after it's been left out of the refrigerator. So for all of those of you that are going to um, these barbecues and the food has been sitting out for a long period of time, you want to be very cautious about eating the food that's been sitting out, that's not been refrigerated. And as soon as you realize that your food has developed some kind of unpleasant smell, or develops mold, it is time to throw it out. It is not time to eat it anymore. So, those are ways, some of the simple ways that the CDC recommends that you can avoid getting food poisoning. Then, one of the things that I wanted to talk about really is what food poisoning is. It's basically just getting sick from the food you eat or from something you drink. And, it can come from germs or other harmful things that are in the food or beverage that you're drinking. And usually you get some stomach upset, you can get some diarrhea, you can get some vomiting. And for the most part, the symptoms are typically very mild. So just some upset stomach, diarrhea and vomiting that may last anywhere from 1 to 3 days. For the most part, most people will have it for the first 24 hours and begin to feel better after that. After the 24-hour period, they tend to feel like, okay, things are getting better. Maybe you may not quite be back to being 100%, but you're definitely feeling better usually after about 24 hours. But for some people, it can actually cause a worse illness or the symptoms will progress. And in those cases, then I typically recommend that you go get seen by a physician and get evaluated. So, like I said, the symptoms are the ones I mentioned. However, if you ever begin to have blood or mucus in your stool, those are reasons that you need to get seen right away. If you develop a fever or headache that's associated with your symptoms, then you also need to be seen. So you want to just make sure that you're taking care of yourself, paying attention to your symptoms while you have these symptoms. One of the things that can happen when you've had food poisoning is you can get dehydrated from the simple fact that you're losing fluids 2 ways, through the vomiting and through the diarrhea. If you're um if you're having these symptoms, you want to just keep drinking water, make sure you're staying hydrated. And in infants and children, a lot of times they get dehydrated much faster than we do as adults. So you want to make sure that they're hydrated. Sometimes drinking plain water isn't enough, especially when you're losing electrolytes through both processes. And like, let's say if you're just vomiting or you're just having diarrhea and it's occasional, a lot of times we don't get dehydrated that way. But if you have any symptoms of dehydration, though, like dry lips, you notice that your baby or your child isn't peeing as much anymore, they're not putting out as much urine output, those are reasons that you might think that, okay, they're a little dehydrated, they need to be drinking water. If you can't do water, you want to get something with electrolytes like Pedialyte, and that goes for you adults also. So you want to make sure that you stay hydrated. If you develop a fever, if your child develops a fever, they need to be seen. Okay. You don't want to wait at home for fevers, for blood in the stool, without getting them evaluated. So, those are just some things that I really want to stress. Then, make sure that you are not eating any more of the food that caused you to feel ill. If you know what it is that caused the symptoms, then you definitely want to make sure that you stop. Once you start tolerating liquids, meaning you're tolerating drinking those fluids, you're tolerating drinking the either Gatorade or Pedialyte, then you want to advance your diet as tolerated, which basically means you want to introduce like what we call the brat diet. So very bland foods like banana, rice, applesauce, and toast. Those are things that your stomach can tolerate, like when you're trying to recover. What you don't want to do, which I've seen people do many times and come into the office because they've done this to themselves, is that they've had food poisoning and now they're introducing a lot of like saucy foods, which just upsets the stomach some more, and it actually makes you end up feeling worse. So you don't want to do that. When you start eating again, you want to make sure that it is bland foods, bread. You don't want to put butter or jams or all this extra stuff on it. Plain bread, that's fine. Plain applesauce, banana, and plain rice. You don't want all the sauces mixed in because that can really lead you to feel your stomach to feel more upset again. And then the other thing that I talked about this month was traveler's diarrhea. So, for some people, they're like, what does that have to do with me? So traveler's diarrhea is actually quite a common illness that can happen. Usually it's associated with loose stools, which is why we call it diarrhea. And then you get some abdominal cramping. Usually traveler's diarrhea isn't as much associated with vomiting like food poisoning, like I mentioned before, but you can get some vomiting with it. But it's primarily diarrhea that happens. You can get it from eating like contaminated food or drinking contaminated water. So water is actually one of the more common reasons why people get traveler's diarrhea. And as the name implies, usually it's traveling outside of your atmosphere to a new place and you're experiencing new things that your body isn't used to. So the drinking water in other locations in other countries may not be processed the same way it is in the place where you live. And so you have a reaction to that. You can get bacteria or virus or other types of organisms within that water that causes you to have the diarrhea. The fortunate thing is that for most people, it's just, that cramping and some diarrhea and it goes away. You want to make sure you hydrate, just like I mentioned before. So for most people, that's all it is. For some people, it actually can get worse, especially when you get dehydrated, and especially in the case where water is the problem and you have to rehydrate yourself with water. So the best thing that I can tell you to do is make sure if you are in a location where the water is potentially contaminated and that's the cause of your diarrhea, you want to make sure that you are boiling the water before you drink it. Boil the water, or if you have access to bottled water, those are options that you have to kind of combat this. You do not want to continue to drink well water or water from a tap in a place that you are not familiar with it. Okay. And then the symptoms are similar to what I mentioned before. And if you develop a fever, um, those are reasons that you want to make sure that you're getting evaluated. Okay. Because if you go from, you can experience moderate to severe dehydration, you can get some persistent vomiting with it, you can get a high fever, you can get bloody stools, dependent on the cause of the diarrhea. Now, for all those things that I just mentioned, severe dehydration, persistent vomiting, high fever, bloody stools, those are all reasons that you absolutely need to get evaluated by a healthcare provider and by a doctor or a higher healthcare provider. Okay? I just want to make sure that the steps that you're taking is something that's going to help you to recover and get your health back. Don't try to treat it at home if any of those symptoms presents themselves. Okay. Um, so again, you want to make sure you're drinking boiled or bottled water. For food, you want to make sure that the food is cooked thoroughly, especially for meats. You want to avoid street foods, and I know I mentioned this before. And then the other one that people tend to not think about a lot is eating raw fruits and vegetables. And what I mean by that is you want to make sure that the fruits that you're eating are fruits that you can peel. So like peeling an orange and eating an orange would be fine, but a fruit that you don't peel would be like having blueberries, and you have to wash it in the same water that might be contaminated. So that's not going to be useful for you. So you want to avoid raw fruits and vegetables unless you're able to wash them thoroughly with boiled or bottled water, or you're able to peel that fruit. Those are some of the ways that you can combat having traveler's diarrhea. So now that I've done that recap for everyone that's on, um, I'm going to have you guys dive into questions. So, whatever questions you have for me, go ahead, type it into the chat, or you can message me on one of the social media platforms that you might follow me on, which is at Amize Health on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or if you happen to be following me on LinkedIn. If you know me personally, you can absolutely send me a text message and I'll be periodically checking to see what questions you all have. I'm so happy to have you guys on here as we go through a Q&A of the food poisoning and traveler's diarrhea. So, of course, you guys know I'm always prepared. I always have some people send in questions beforehand. So while I wait for you guys to get your questions up, I'm going to dive into some of the questions that was already given to me. And I think we have some great ones tonight, and I'm excited to be able to answer everyone's questions. So if you have a question for me, make sure that you go ahead and type it into the chat, or you can message me, like I mentioned before, on one of the social media platforms at Amize Health. Okay. So once again, we have some wonderful questions tonight, and I'm going to just go through them as I got them and see what I can answer for you guys. And the first question is, are there any foods that I should be avoiding? Hi there. So I'm so glad to have you. I'm so glad to have you here with me, for everyone in the chat. So, are there any foods that I should avoid? Yes. The ones that I mentioned before, which is any kind of, for traveler's diarrhea, it would be any raw vegetables or fruits. You want to make sure that they are either cooked or fruits that you're able to peel. And then you want to, for food poisoning, you want to avoid foods that have been sitting outside of the refrigerator for a long period of time. I started this talking about the types of foods that you eat at like barbecues and things like that. And oftentimes that food is sitting there for a while. Sometimes you don't even know how long it's been sitting there. You want to really be cautious about eating foods that have been sitting out for a while, especially foods that might have dairy products in it. So those potato salads, macaroni salads, those kind of things tend to have dairy products in it. That's been sitting out on the counter. You don't want to eat that, because the likelihood of getting food poisoning from something like that is much higher. You want to avoid eating undercooked meats. Those things can also cause food poisoning. And then again, for traveler's diarrhea, any kind of contaminated water. Obviously, if you are not sure about whether or not the water is contaminated, if it's some location that you have, sure that you are boiling the water or drinking bottled water. Okay, I hope I was able to answer that question for you. If there's any clarification that you need on that, make sure you just type it into the chat box so I can answer that for you. Okay, and so another question is, how many days do you think it will last? So typically, like I mentioned before, typically it lasts, you can have both traveler's diarrhea or food poisoning for about 1 to 3 days. After the first 24 hours, usually most people will say, I'm actually starting to feel better. But if it's been going on for 3 days and you're like, look, I've been having this annoying thing happening. I've been throwing up. I've been having diarrhea for 3 days now. And it just don't seem like it's going nowhere. This is, you need to go ahead and go get seen. If you can't get into your primary care doctor, and I know appointments are hard to get these days, then maybe you need to go ahead and see an urgent care physician. But you need to go ahead and get seen. Okay. If you feel like, okay, I'm on day 2, I am feeling a little bit better, but should I be further along than this? it's really kind of hard to gauge how far along you should be at what point, other than number one, if your symptoms are moving in the right direction, which means you are starting to feel better, or like the frequency of your stool. So, like, let's say on day one, you were having diarrhea, you were running to the bathroom at least 2 times per hour or once per hour, and that went on for the first day, and you just couldn't sit down because you just kept running. Or you, and then on day two you realize, well, I'm not going twice an hour anymore, I'm going once an hour, or I'm not even going every hour anymore, and you know that it's still a lot, but I'm just not going every hour anymore. That means you're making progress. The other thing too is the quality of the stool or caliber of the stool. So if your stools were very loose at first, or watery, and then you're realizing, oh, my stools are more formed now, then that actually more formed and less frequent, that means you're getting better, right? Your abdominal cramping is not the same anymore, that means you're getting better. Things, if you are developing a fever and your fever is still persistent, you're getting worse. That means you need to go on ahead and get seen. So 1 to 3 days is kind of where what we're gauging. But if you're in that 1 to 3 day period, like I said, and things are getting worse, or you start to see some blood in your stool, absolutely go ahead and get evaluated. Okay. I hope that answered that question. So for you guys, like I said, type any questions that you have regarding traveler's diarrhea or food poisoning. Go ahead and type them into the box. And overall, I also wanted to say this. I picked these topics because they're relevant topics for the summer, but overall, these fall under the category of what we would call gastroenteritis. And so gastroenteritis is caused by can be caused by the various things. Viruses being the most common. It can be from bacteria, it can be from other types of organisms. Now, most viral gastroenteritis can hit you and make you feel kind of like you're having the flu. That happens for a lot of people. It's like, oh, I have a stomach flu. A lot of times that's what people are talking about when they say they have a stomach flu. It's like that gastroenteritis is usually a viral gastroenteritis. Usually the same things that I'm talking about here applies, which is hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. Make sure you are hydrating with something that's repleting your electrolytes as you go along, okay? And then um, your symptoms really should be improving within that 1 to 3 day period. Okay. And if they're getting worse, you got to get seen. So one of the things that came up was whether or not there's anything that you can take, or are there, any kind of fixes for this type of thing. And what I would say to that is the things that I've mentioned already are really relevant in all the situations that I've talked about, which is hydration. So making sure you're hydrated is of the utmost importance. The other thing that sometimes can help is something like Pepto-Bismol. So Pepto-Bismol is helpful because it will, if the cause of your symptoms is bacterial related, it slows the growth of bacteria, so it actually will help you to feel better. So a lot of times if you're going to travel to a developing country, or even if it's to another developed country, you're traveling, a lot of times taking a bottle of Pepto-Bismol with you is actually a good thing to do, because if it pops up, then you're not running around in that country trying to figure out where to get some. So having some Pepto-Bismol will help. And then another type of medicine is, which is an anti-diarrheal medication that can help and that you can also get over the counter. It's called loperamide or Imodium. So Imodium can be quite helpful. Now, I always say with the caveat that if you're taking Imodium, you want to make sure again that you're just having some loose stools. If you are having fevers, if you're having blood in the stool, I would recommend against taking Imodium and going ahead and getting seen in the office. Okay, that is not something that you want to fix by yourself. Now, in a lot of places, we recommend doing what we call a oral rehydration solution, which is in essence water with some electrolytes in it, which is why I tell people do the Pedialyte or do the something like Gatorade, because those will already have it in it. Usually it has the type of electrolytes that I'm talking about replacing are potassium and sodium, things like that. So the things that I mentioned before that you could try to eat from the brat diet, like bananas, you're gonna get some potassium in that if you're able to tolerate having potassium. So this is in a situation where you do not have Gatorade, you don't have Pedialyte, you don't have access to oral rehydration solution, and you just have water. Boil your water for one. You want to make sure that water is not contaminated. Boil the water. It's going to get rid of most things. Um, and then you want to try to have a banana that can get your potassium in. If you have anything that has some sodium in it, you can get that in, and that'll get you the chloride also. So that's kind of a makeshift way to make sure that you're getting those electrolytes if you don't have electrolyte containing solution already. Okay. Those are the things that I would recommend. Make sure you're paying attention. If you have a thermometer, try to check your temperature. You know, if your temperature is increasing, again, you need to be seen. If it is not, or you just, some people will sometimes, oh, I have a low grade fever, it's 99, but I'm really concerned. You do not need to go in for a 99 temperature. We view a fever of 100.4 or higher as a fever. That's when you need to say, I need to see the doctor. It should be higher than that. It doesn't have to be, but it should be higher than that. If you I you know I keep repeating the same things about the blood in the stool, and the reason why I am is because I see so many patients that end up coming in and saying, oh wait, I've been having blood in my stool for X amount of time, and they did not get seen. And that is such a critical thing to get evaluated for. If you're having blood in your urine or blood in your stool, come on into the office, get evaluated. You do not want to sit at home and try to fix that yourself, because likely you won't be able to. Okay. All right. So, any questions from the chat? Let me go ahead and check our social media platforms just to make sure that we're not having any questions pop up on those. And in the meantime, I'll go ahead and see whether or not I need to just answer questions from our current list of questions that was pre-sent in. So while I wait for that, I'm going to go ahead and keep answering questions. So now, in a remote area, like let's say you're on a trip somewhere, you're on a mission trip, what do you do if you have it? It's all the things that I just mentioned before. Boiling water is of the utmost importance. And all the things that I mentioned before. So, one question that came up also was uh, the difference between traveler's diarrhea and non traveler's diarrhea. So, I think that's a really good question. And the reason why is because the fact that we're designating this as traveler's diarrhea, it's only because you've actually physically traveled from one place to the next, and that's how you got diarrhea. Also, um, you know, when you travel, like I mentioned before, you're going from your environment and the things that you're used to in your environment to another environment, and you're not used to those things. So the people in that location may be able to drink and tolerate that water or eat and tolerate those foods, and you're not, because your microbiome, your gut microbiome, so your stomach microbiome, is just not able to tolerate that. So when you have diarrhea at home, that diarrhea likely could be from contaminated food or water, like I mentioned before. And it's the same thing when you go abroad. But the part of the reason why it's happening when you go abroad is just because you're not used to it. Okay. One of the questions that popped up is, besides boiling, what else can I do in a remote location without easy access to portable water or healthcare? So that's really hard. And the reason why I say that is because boiling of water is actually one of the easier things to do when you are in a remote location, because filters are not as readily available in a remote location. So when you are, and I'm going to go all the way out on a limb and say you're trapped in the woods somewhere, and you don't know what to do. It's finding something where you can set up a situation where your boiling water is actually going to be to your benefit, because you will not have access to something that you can use to filter the water that's going to be able to filter out the types of microorganisms that may be in the water that will cause you harm. So even though the question is asking what can I do except for boiling, boiling is still the answer, because you really in a remote location would not have access to the other things that you could do, which is if you're somewhere where you can get a filter, getting a filter would be helpful. Or if you're in a location where you would be able to get bottled water. So sometimes with bottled water you can get bottled spring water or bottled purified water. Whichever one of those you get doesn't matter, as long as you are getting some bottled water, because those have been either purified already, and likely will lack any kind of microorganisms that would be harmful to your body. Okay, so that would be the answer for that. And I know that that doesn't quite give you a different option, but that is really the best option that you have, especially in a remote setting. Now when I go on mission trips, oftentimes one of the things that we try to do is to arm people in these remote locations with basically portable filtering systems for their water, because boiling, just like the question is implying, is not always something that's easily accessible or easy to do for everyone. And so while because we understand that, that's why trying to provide them with filtering systems sometimes is helpful, but that is still a hard thing to get to remote areas. So if you can, I would recommend boiling the water. Okay, any additional questions for me? Again, this is Dr. Thorpe Amize. I'm talking about um, traveler's diarrhea and food poisoning, and whatever questions you have regarding both of those. Uh, the difference, the other thing that I needed to talk about was whether or not someone with any kind of pre-existing condition could be impacted by this, and or how are they impacted by this, because so much of the population already have pre-existing conditions. Now I would say this. So it depends on the pre-existing condition, because some conditions really, it wouldn't really necessarily make that much of a difference. It's still dehydration. However, one particular case that I'll use as an example is someone that might have diabetes. So the impact on the body for someone who has diabetes when they get dehydrated in comparison to somebody else, it's going to actually, they likely will become dehydrated faster than someone who does not have the condition. And the impact of that dehydration is actually worse. So I would actually recommend that if you have a pre-existing condition, you want to actually be even more careful about your hydration status. So you want to make sure you always have access to water or something to drink to make sure you're hydrated, especially if you're traveling. Okay. Um, and then one question that also came in was regarding recommendations for a specific country of travel. So, one of the things, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the chat because I want you guys to have access to this website, but the CDC actually has recommendations for traveling, and I wanted to go ahead and kind of walk through a little bit of that with you guys so that you're aware that the information, it's there for you. So, part of why I do this again is to arm us with information so that we're always making the best decisions for our health, and for the health of our loved ones. So, I want you guys to have reputable sources of information. So, it's not just going to Dr. Google. to get your answers, but having reputable sources of information. And the CDC has a website that you can go through and go to the country that you're planning to travel to and get the information from there that will tell you what you need to do to travel to that country. So the question was specifically about the country, like, oh, I'm planning to go to Thailand. What should I do? And I just put in the chat the website, the CDC website for getting information regarding traveling. So I went all the way down to Thailand, and it tells you what precautions you need to take. So there are recommended vaccines, the routine vaccines that they recommend for you to get. There's a section for that, which includes chickenpox, um, pertussis, the diphtheria, pertussis, tetanus shot, and then the flu shot, the MMR, which is the measles, mumps, rubella, polio, and shingles. So those things are recommended. And then they go through vaccines for other things or information for other things, which is it says everyone should get a COVID-19 vaccine. And then it used to be that cholera was an issue, but it says cholera is no longer an issue for transmission there, so vaccine is not recommended. That's cholera. For hepatitis A, they give specific recommendations for that. B, Japanese encephalitis. So basically, my point is you can go through the list of recommended vaccines for the country of choice, and in this case, it's Thailand, in order to know what to do. Now, one of the things after you've gone through all the vaccines, it goes through a list of non vaccine preventable diseases. So, for non vaccine preventable diseases, the first one it says is ding, ding, ding. What did I say before? Avoid contaminated water. So, you can get what is called leptospirosis from it. And where you get it from is touching urine or other bodily fluids from an animal infected with leptospirosis. You will not know if that animal is infected. Some of us like to be touching other animals, touching whatever you see walking by. Don't do that when you go to another country. You might just get something. So try to avoid doing stuff like that, okay? Don't let them animals lick on you. Don't do that. Okay, you also want to make sure that when you're swimming, so it says you can get this from swimming or wading in urine contaminated fresh water or contact with urine contaminated mud. And then drinking water or eating food contaminated with animal urine. Did you see the thing that happened in all of those? All of them were related to urine. So if an animal pees on something or other bodily fluids, you don't want to have nothing to do with that. Okay? It goes without saying, but I'm saying it. And then if you go down even further, it tells you to avoid bug bites because from mosquitoes you could get dengue and chikungunya, and then or Zika, and then from the sandfly bite you can get leishmaniasis. So it basically goes through all. There's airborne and droplet precautions, and then things about things that you can eat and drink safely. So you get that information there too. And then things that you can do to prevent bug bites, things you can do to stay safe while you're outside, keeping away from animals. I mean, they go through the whole list. So the CDC really goes through a way to arm you to make sure that you are not getting ill while you're in another country. Does it happen to some people? Absolutely. It happens. But what they're trying to do is make sure that you are armed with information so that when you go to another country, you know or you are prepared for what is there that might not be in your home country. So again, I put the website there for you to check it out. If you plan on going to some exotic location, right, like Thailand, we got the information there for you on the CDC website. So before you plan your next trip, look at the site, make sure you got the vaccines that you need to get, make sure you have the information you need, arm yourself, be prepared, and be safe while you're on your trip. But still, enjoy. Because the best way to enjoy your trip is to make sure that you're healthy, right? How are you going to enjoy it if you are sick the whole trip? So follow the guidelines and enjoy your trip. Okay, what other questions do you guys have for me? So far, we've been talking about a lot of things, and we've been talking about foodborne illnesses, basically food poisoning and traveler's diarrhea, ways to avoid it, what causes it, and what you can do to treat it if you do get it. And what other things do you guys want to know about these illnesses that I haven't answered already? Or if there's something that I need to reiterate or that you didn't get, go ahead, type it into the box. Feel free to send me a message, whether it be on one of the social media platforms at Amize Health, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you have any questions, you can send it there, or you can go ahead type it into the chat. Or if you know me personally, you can go ahead and send me a text message. I'm happy to answer all your questions, and I'm so happy to have you guys join me today. Remember that I do these Q&As every fourth Monday of the month at 8 p.m. on this channel, and the purpose of doing it is to answer the questions regarding the things that I've put out. If you have a specific question that you want answered, or a specific topic that you want me to cover that I have not covered in the past few months, you can always let me know by typing it into the chat or sending me a message. I'll be happy to answer questions for you that way also. Okay? So, we've been talking about a lot tonight, and I wanted to see if there's any other questions that you guys have regarding all the things that we've talked about today. So, I talked to I one of the questions that was asked was about when to see a doctor, and I did cover that. And again, remember, you want to make sure you see a doctor if your symptoms are not improving. And if you develop a fever, if your symptoms are getting worse, if you start to have blood or mucus in your stool, those are all reasons that you would want to go ahead and get evaluated. Okay. Or if the other thing is, if you become so dehydrated and you're just not tolerating drinking, sometimes we end up having to get you on an IV to get you hydrated back to the place where you need to be before sending you back home. So sometimes, it can get so bad that you just are not able to do it yourself because you're just not tolerating fluids. And going into the doctor, sometimes getting something to help with the nausea to prevent you from this constant vomiting can be helpful, so that you can get back to drinking again. Again, with small children, they get dehydrated very, very fast. So you do not want to take your chances with them if they're not tolerating drinking. So sometimes parents, when they come into the office, they're so concerned because their kids aren't eating. So eating, while that's important, is not our primary concern. Drinking is, because drinking leads to dehydration if you're not tolerating drinking. So you want to make sure they're drinking. If they're not drinking, if their urine output decreases, if you notice that they're crying, like, oh, why is baby girl crying but there's no tears coming out, that's a sign of dehydration. Because sometimes you think, as parents, sometimes we think, oh, they're crying, they may be crying, but it ain't really nothing wrong. No, you need to pay attention, especially in the setting of vomiting or diarrhea, because that crying with no tears likely means that that child is dehydrated. So pay attention to that. Those are reasons to bring them in to get evaluated. If they're running fevers and the fever is not responsive to like ibuprofen or Tylenol, then they need to be seen. For any child, and I have been mentioning kids, but I need to separate this age group. For any child under 2 years old, they just need to be seen. Don't try to fix that at home. Just get them in. Okay? Get them in, get them evaluated. Under 2 years old, you do not want to just try to figure it out yourself. You want to make sure that they get evaluated. Um, and then if they are, like I said, the symptoms that I mentioned before, which is decreased tears, decreased urine, or not tolerating drinking, dry mucous membranes, which basically means the inside of the mouth is dry or the lips are really dry. Those are all signs that this child is dehydrated, so they need to get seen. If you, as an adult, are having those symptoms, you need to get seen too. Severe dehydration, like the excessive thirst, dry mouth, little or no urination. Sometimes you get so weak because you just haven't been drinking. Sometimes you could get dizzy or lightheaded. um, all reasons that you need to go get seen. Okay, if this is lasting more than 3 days, go get seen. And I like to give these recommendations because some I've seen patients via telemedicine. I've seen patients in the office as a primary care doctor, and I've seen patients in the urgent care setting. And now, a lot of times, I think what we have is a problem of figuring out who to go get seen by, and how to navigate this healthcare process. So, in a situation like this, if you are not sure, like let's say I'm going to give you some scenarios so that that can help you to decide, like, where are you going to get seen. If you as an adult are ill and you're like, oh, it's day one, I think this might be food poisoning, but really I'm just not sure. um you can't go wrong with seeing a telemedicine provider, a urgent care provider, or your primary care if there is an appointment available. You really can't go wrong with any of those. However, if you go online and you see a telemedicine provider, what they will and should be telling you is, if your symptoms don't get better, just like what I'm mentioning, then you need to go on ahead in person and get seen. So after 3 days, when you're if I'm saying, oh, if your symptoms haven't improved after 3 days, you need to get seen, that is not the time for you to go to see a telemedicine provider. That is the time for you to go get seen in person, because what happens is we need to examine you, and an appropriate examination cannot, for that type of thing, cannot happen via telemedicine. So I really would encourage you to go get seen. Now, what you can use telemedicine for in that situation is, like, oh, I really don't know what to do. I remember that lady Dr. Thorpe saying something, but I can't remember what she said. I'm feeling too sick to even think about it. I don't know what to do. You calling or getting a telemedicine appointment because you're unsure and you're trying to figure it out, that's fine. But to actually have a physical exam done on your body to determine what the next steps should be, you need to go in person. Because if you are at home and you're severely dehydrated, you cannot get IV fluids through the computer or through your telephone. Okay? I know it may sound silly coming from me, but I really want to say it because I've had to say it to people on appointments. So you can't do that through the telephone. You can't do it through the computer. Come on in. Get seen in person. If it's been that long, you need to get seen. Now, those are appropriate things to do with telemedicine and urgent care. Now, with a primary care doctor, let's say you call up your primary care doctor and you're like, you call the office, you tell them what your symptoms are, and you really want your doctor to see you because you're very concerned and you have a relationship with your doctor, and you're like, I want my doctors to see me, but your doctor has no appointments until next week. Are you supposed to wait till next week? Depends on your symptoms. It really does depend. That's why you're calling in, because the person on the phone should be triaging the situation. So if you do not speak to someone who you can tell your symptoms to, who then tells you you can wait for an appointment or you need to go to urgent care, then you're just talking to a receptionist. That person can't tell you what to do. You need to speak to a nurse or a healthcare provider who can tell you what you need to do in that situation, if it's worth waiting versus going. Most of the time, in an acute, what we call acute, meaning it's happening right now, in an acute situation, you don't have time to wait until next week. If you're having bloody stools, you don't have time to wait for 2 weeks for an appointment. So even though you really want to see your primary care doctor, if they don't have any appointments, I would encourage you, schedule the appointment that you want with them for when they're available. However, go on ahead in to the urgent care, or actually with bloody diarrhea, to the ER to get seen. Go to the emergency room, okay? Because you don't want to wait when it's something that serious. Okay? I hope I was able to answer all those questions for you guys. If you have any additional questions, because we're starting to wind down now, go ahead and put them in the chat, or send them to me on the social media platforms at Amize Health. And I'll be sure to answer them. Again, I'm on here every fourth Monday at 8 p.m. answering your questions. And I drop a new video every Monday for you guys to go through, review. And if you have any questions, jot them down, save them up, send me a message, because if you do, I'll be sure to answer them on one of the Q&A sessions, okay? I am happy to do that. So I'm so glad for all of you that have joined me tonight. I'm just going to check to see if I have any new questions that have popped up since we've been chatting. And you guys can let me know if you have any current questions, or any comments about topics that you would like to hear about as the months go by. And I would be happy to kind of give you information about that. If it is a topic that I am not able to give any kind of expertise on, I think what I'm going to start doing is try to have people who have the ability to speak to those things come on and answer some questions for you guys also. Okay, what questions do you guys have before I start to wrap up tonight? This has been a great session full of wonderful questions, so I hope that it's been really useful to you. Okay. So, again, thank you guys for joining. I'm going to just give a quick run through as I wait for these last few questions. So, we talked about food poisoning. The key takeaways for food poisoning were: make sure that you clean your hands, wash your hands properly when handling food, separate foods. So if you're touching meats, you can't use your hand to then touch your fruits. You want to make sure you wash your hands between foods, different type of food products. Make sure you're cooking your food appropriately, because undercooked food can lead to food poisoning. And then avoid eating perishable foods like fruits and vegetables 1 to 2 hours after it's been left out of the refrigerator, or if it develops any kind of unpleasant smell, you want to trash it. You do not want those foods, okay? So chill the food, so meaning refrigerate. And then if you do get food poisoning, make sure you're not eating any more of that food that caused you to feel ill if you know exactly what it was. Make sure you're hydrating, because if you're vomiting and having diarrhea, you're likely losing a lot. You need to replenish. So replenish, you want to replenish with something with electrolytes in it. If you don't have anything with electrolytes and you're not having like severe vomiting and diarrhea, then plain water is fine. But if you are having significant loose stools and vomiting, then you definitely want something with electrolytes like Pedialyte or Gatorade, something like that, Powerade. Once you start tolerating foods, you want to make sure that you're introducing bland foods first. You don't want to jump into saucy foods right away, because that might hurt your stomach. You don't want to go to acidic foods, so like soda pops. That those are a no-no, because they might just irritate the stomach lining. Some you're already a little irritated, so introducing something else that's acidic, like soda pops or oranges or grapefruits, things like that, are acidic, so you want to kind of avoid them. You want to introduce bland foods first, like bananas, rice, applesauce, and toast, what we call the brat diet, and see how you tolerate those. And as you begin to tolerate those more, then you want to introduce other foods, okay? So wait till you're feeling better, basically, because if you do too much too soon, like if you go, like you're having these symptoms and now you start eating dairy, chances are your symptoms are not going to go away in the 1 to 3 days that I'm talking about. It might stick around for a little bit longer. You don't want that. Um, And then with traveler's diarrhea, you want to reduce your risk by being careful about what you're eating and drinking while you're traveling. Before you travel, go ahead and check out the CDC website that I put in there. Make sure you're understanding what you need to prepare yourself for when you travel to a foreign country. And then drink bottled or boiled water. Make sure you're cooking your food appropriately. Be very cautious eating street food. And then you don't want to eat any raw fruits or vegetables. Make sure you're eating fruits that are peeled or fruits that you're able to thoroughly wash with boiled or bottled water. So those are all the tips for tonight, along with everything else I talked about. If you missed it, we'll have the ability to play it again because it'll be uploaded on the site. Okay. So if you missed it, you can go back through it. Hopefully, these were all good tips for you guys. You can check me out next Monday when I drop the next video. And then also, like I said, every fourth Monday. Actually, next Monday is a fifth Monday. So next week, I'm going to be putting up something special for you guys. And then on the first Monday of the month, we'll go back to our normal routine. And come back again. We'll talk about more topics. I'll answer more questions. We'll do it all over again. And again, we're doing all of this so that we could continue our journey to amazing health. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. I hope you have a great night, and I'll see you next time. Okay, bye bye.